Dawn breaks over New Britain, September 1st, 1943. Inside the sweltering command tent at Rabaul Airfield, Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, a veteran flyer whose left eye socket bears the permanent mark of an American gunner's precision from 12 months prior, leans over a freshly decoded intelligence brief. His remaining eye tracks across the text, and suddenly, genuine laughter erupts in the tropical humidity. "Listen to this," he announces to the officers nearby, reading aloud. "The enemy has unveiled their newest fighter, mass equivalent to a medium bomber, wingspan approaching that of a cargo plane. They're calling it the Hellcat. According to our analysts, it tips the scales at double our Zero's weight, yet another monument to American engineering incompetence." Beyond the canvas walls, his squadron's A6M0 fighters stand in perfect formation on the metal runway plates, elegant predators, streamlined and lethal. These machines had reigned supreme across Pacific battlespace for 24 uninterrupted months. British Hurricanes had fallen, American P-40s had burned. The Dutch Brewster Buffaloes had been obliterated. This newest American contraption, this overweight so-called Hellcat, would meet an identical fate. What Sakai couldn't possibly grasp, what none of the Imperial Navy aviators preparing for dawn patrol could fathom, was that exactly 1 month from this moment of mockery, their failure would commence the methodical extermination of Japanese air superiority. The F6F Hellcat would ultimately demolish 5,223 enemy aircraft while sacrificing merely 270 to aerial combat. A kill-death ratio of 19-1, it would fundamentally restructure carrier-based warfare, shatter the spine of Japan's aerial capabilities, and demonstrate conclusively that the Zero's legendary dominance had been constructed on assumptions that would prove catastrophically flawed. The entire calculus of air superiority stood on the brink of revolutionary transformation, executed by an aircraft that appeared aerodynamically wrong, handled like a weighted brawler, and seemingly contradicted every principle Japanese tacticians had mastered through blood and experience within half a year. Those same pilots, now chuckling at reconnaissance reports, would compose farewell letters to their families, acutely aware that encountering a formation of Hellcats represented nothing less than a mathematical probability of death. The confidence radiating from Japanese naval headquarters in September 1943 wasn't rooted in blind nationalism. It was anchored in irrefutable numbers. From December 7, 1941 onward, the Imperial Japanese Naval Air Service had compiled victory statistics that bordered on the mathematically absurd Pearl Harbor. 29 aircraft lost while annihilating 347 American planes. The Philippines campaign, 7 Japanese losses versus 103 enemy aircraft destroyed over Darwin, Australia, 2 losses against 30 kills. The British Far East Fleet's aviation arm, completely eradicated. The Dutch East Indies Air Force, eliminated within days. At the epicenter of this aerial massacre flew the Mitsubishi A6M0, an aircraft that had fundamentally rewritten fighter design orthodoxy. When American engineers finally captured intact specimens in 1942 and conducted performance trials, their initial reaction was pure disbelief. The test data seemed impossible. A fighter possessing bomber-level range, biplane-grade maneuverability, and devastating firepower, the specifications defied conventional wisdom. Warrant Officer Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, destined to become Japan's highest-scoring ace with 87 confirmed victories, captured the Zero's ethereal qualities in his personal diary. Later recovered by historians, piloting the Zero transcends mere aircraft operation. It's like your thoughts manifest as flight. The machine responds to intention, not simply stick movement American fighters handle like freight trucks. Brute strength wrapped in clumsiness. They construct warplanes with the same philosophy they apply to automobiles: excessive weight, redundant systems, wasteful over-engineering. The Zero achieved its seemingly miraculous performance through a radical design ideology. Extra super duralumin, a proprietary aluminum alloy classified as a military secret, enabled an airframe 30% lighter than equivalent American constructions. No armor plating burdened the pilot. No self-sealing fuel cells added mass. Frequently, even the radio equipment was stripped away to eliminate an additional 30 pounds every single ounce sacrificed on the altar of performance. Initial intelligence regarding the F6F Hellcat filtered into Japanese command structures through neutral Swedish diplomatic channels during early 1943. The technical specifications read like either crude propaganda or deliberate tactical disinformation. Combat weight, 12,186 pounds. The Zero weighed 5,800 pounds, wing area sprawling across 334 square feet, housing a drag-inducing radial power plant. Ammunition capacity, 2,400 rounds. Armor plating encasing virtually every critical system, bulletproof glass protecting the cockpit. Self-sealing fuel tanks containing 250 gallons. Captain Minoru Genda, the tactical mastermind who had orchestrated the Pearl Harbor operation, reviewed these specifications at Combined Fleet Headquarters. His assessment, meticulously preserved in Japan's Defense Ministry archives, dripped with contempt. The Americans remain incapable of learning. This Hellcat represents merely a continuation of their bankrupt design philosophy, attempting to compensate for pilot deficiencies through sheer mechanical mass. Any Zero will execute circles around this monstrosity. The mathematical analysis appeared to validate his dismissal completely. The Zero's wing loading of 22 pounds per square foot yielded a turning radius of 612 feet. The Hellcat's wing loading of 36.5 pounds per square foot mathematically implied a turning radius exceeding 900 feet. In turning engagements, the absolute foundation of Japanese fighter doctrine, the Hellcat would be utterly defenseless. Marcus Island, September 30th, 1943. Petty Officer, First Class. Yoshio Fukui maintained escort position during a routine reconnaissance sweep when he detected them. 6 dark navy blue silhouettes climbing from the southeastern horizon. His initial assessment, documented in his after-action filing: B-25 medium bombers on unusual attack vector. Then they banked, and the distinctive profile emerged. Single-engine configuration, unusually massive fuselage, wings appearing disproportionately abbreviated for the body mass. Initial encounter with F6F type fighter, his report would state. First impression: Americans have somehow mounted fighter armament on torpedo bomber airframes engaged using standard interception tactics. Standard tactics meant exploiting the Zero's superior turn performance to achieve tail position. Fukui rolled into a descending turn, anticipating the heavy American fighter would maintain straight flight, permitting him to curve into its vulnerable 6 o'clock position. Instead, something unprecedented unfolded. The Hellcat didn't flee. It didn't attempt matching his turn. It went vertical. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, generating 2,000 horsepower, a full 700 horsepower beyond the Zero's Nakajima Sakai's 1,130 horsepower output, catapulted the Hellcat skyward at 3,500 feet per minute. Fukui, attempting pursuit, watched his airspeed hemorrhage as the Zero struggled against gravitational forces. At 15,000 feet, the Hellcat executed a maneuver that shouldn't have been physically possible given its mass, a hammerhead stall turn that positioned it directly onto Fukui's tail. American pilot opened fire at 400 meters, Fukui's report detailed. 6 machine guns, not the anticipated 4. Volume of fire unprecedented in my experience. My aircraft absorbed 17 hits within 3 seconds, survival achieved only by entering emergency spin. Fukui barely limped back to Marcus Island, his Zero perforated with holes. His wingman, Petty Officer Second Class Masao, never returned. Neither did the reconnaissance aircraft they'd been protecting. First blood belonged to the Hellcat. The Weight Paradox. Wake Island, October 5th, 1943.
Task Force 14 struck Wake Island with characteristic American aggression. Lieutenant Yoshio led 12 Zeros from the 252nd Air Group to intercept what intelligence suggested was another harassment raid. American carriers had been executing these hit-and-fade operations for months, typically withdrawing before Japanese fighters could engage decisively. This time would be fundamentally different. We achieved 20,000 feet altitude, Shega documented in his personal diary. Below our position, 12 F6F fighters arranged in 3 4-plane divisions. We held every tactical advantage imaginable. Altitude superiority, positional dominance, surprise. Victory was mathematically guaranteed. The engagement that followed demolished Japanese tactical orthodoxy. As the Zeros plummeted onto the Hellcats, the American fighters refused to scatter or attempt turning combat. They maintained rigid formation discipline, accelerating into a shallow dive that preserved energy state. When the Zeros opened fire at extended range, hoping for probability hits, the Hellcats simply absorbed the punishment. The Hellcat's protective armor included 212 pounds of steel plate shielding the pilot, 110 pounds encasing the oil circulation system, self-sealing fuel bladders capable of withstanding dozens of punctures without catastrophic failure. As the Zeros exhausted ammunition in repeated diving attacks, the Hellcats launched their counteroffensive. Rather than engaging in traditional dogfighting, they weaponized their mass climbing at maximum power. They reached altitudes where the Zero's engine gasped for oxygen. At 25,000 feet, the Hellcat still produced 1,650 horsepower. The Zero had degraded to 900 horsepower. They descended upon us like raptors on field mice, Shiga wrote. Their weight translated to dive speeds we couldn't match. They would plunge, unleash those 6 horrific guns, then climb away before we could respond. 8 Zeros were obliterated. 0 Hellcats were lost. Rabaul, November 11th, 1943. The assembled aviators of the 204th Air Group sat in tense silence as Lieutenant Commander Tao Tanamisu conducted the briefing. Tanamisu, credited with 32 confirmed victories, represented one of the rare pilots who had survived multiple Hellcat encounters and lived to analyze the experience. "Discard everything you believe you understand about aerial combat," he began bluntly. "The Americans have rewritten the rule book. They no longer engage in our style of warfare. They function like executioners, not warriors." Tanamizu proceeded to explain what Japanese pilots were learning slowly, painfully, and fatally. The Hellcat hadn't been engineered to outturn the Zero. It had been designed to never require turning. Employing combat methodology designated energy fighting, Hellcat pilots maintained velocity and altitude advantages, converting potential energy into kinetic energy through slashing attack runs that denied Zero pilots any opportunity to exploit their superior maneuverability. "They operate in coordinated pairs," Tanamizu continued, "one element high, one element low. While you're engaging the first, the second is already diving onto your position. Those radios, which we ridiculed as unnecessary weight, enable them to coordinate with flawless precision. We fly as individual samurai. They fight as an integrated machine." The Technology Chasm, Truck Lagoon, December 1943. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, who had personally led the Pearl Harbor strike, now served as Air Operations Officer for the combined fleet. His inspection of battle-damaged Zeros returning from Hellcat encounters revealed a widening technological abyss. The firepower disparity was brutal mathematics. The Hellcat's 6 Browning M2 machine guns discharged 750 rounds per minute each, 4,500 rounds per minute combined. Each .50 caliber projectile weighed 46 grams and traveled at 2,900 feet per second, delivering 3,500 foot-pounds of kinetic energy per impact. The Zero's 7.7 millimeter machine guns fired projectiles weighing 11 grams at 2,300 feet per second, 750 foot-pounds of energy. More disturbing were emerging reports of American radar-guided fighter direction. While Japanese pilots still relied exclusively on visual acquisition to locate enemies, Hellcat pilots were being vectored directly to their targets by shipboard radar controllers who could detect Japanese aircraft formations from 50 miles distant. Lieutenant Sadamu Kamachi described his first radar-directed interception. "We were climbing through cloud layers when they struck us. No warning, no visual contact possible. Hellcats diving from above, perfectly positioned on our exact heading. They possessed knowledge of our location, our altitude, our course. We were blind men fighting opponents who could see in absolute darkness." January 1944. The Japanese pilot crisis had evolved from concerning to catastrophic. The pre-war Imperial Navy pilot training program had been globally recognized as the most demanding training, required 3 full years, with pilots entering combat operations with 700 flight hours. Army pilots received a minimum of 500 hours. They were aerial combat artists, trained extensively in aerobatics, gunnery, and the spiritual philosophy of air warfare. By early 1944, Japanese naval pilots were entering frontline combat. With 300 hours of flight experience, Army pilots received 200 hours. Fuel shortages meant the majority of training occurred in gliders. Gunnery practice was rationed to 50 rounds per pilot total, formation flying, instrument procedures, radio communications, all eliminated to accelerate pilot deployment. Meanwhile, American pilots arrived in theater with 300 hours minimum, including 50 hours in aircraft type. They had fired thousands of practice rounds, practiced carrier landings until the procedures became muscle memory, learned energy tactics and safety over Texas training fields. Lieutenant Commander Yoshihiro Hashimoto, training officer at Kasumigaura Naval Air Station, wrote in his final report, "We are dispatching children to combat professionals." Yesterday, Ensign Yamamoto deployed to the front. He had never fired his guns in flight. "We have no ammunition for practice." He had never flown at night. "We have no fuel for such training." He lasted 7 minutes in his first engagement. The Formosa Revelation, October 12th to 16th, 1944. Vice Admiral Shigeru Fukudome, commander of the 2nd Air Fleet, committed everything available to halt American carrier raids on Formosa, over 700 aircraft, including the final trained pilots from homeland training squadrons. Japanese forces claimed spectacular triumph. 26 carriers and battleships sunk, 300 aircraft destroyed. The reality, discovered only after pilots returned and gun camera footage was analyzed, proved catastrophic. Actual American losses: 89 aircraft, Japanese losses: 329 aircraft, and virtually every experienced pilot. Lieutenant Sadaki Akamatsu, among the few surviving veterans, described the massacre in his memoirs. The Hellcats were positioned at every altitude as we climbed. They waited above us. As we dove, they appeared below. They had partitioned the sky into grid sectors, each zone covered by a division. It wasn't combat. It was systematic extermination. June 19th, 1944. The Philippine Sea. The Japanese Navy committed its reconstituted carrier force to Operation Ago, the decisive engagement that would supposedly annihilate American carrier power in the Pacific 9 carriers. 450 aircraft, their best remaining pilots, opposing them. Task Force 58 with 15 carriers and 956 aircraft, 450 of them F6F Hellcats. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa launched his strikes in 4 sequential waves, confident that Japanese pilot skill and the Zero's range advantage would prove decisive. The first wave of 69 aircraft launched at 8:30 hours. American radar detected them at 150 miles. Hellcats were vectored for interception with perfect positioning, altitude advantage, sun at their backs, approaching from Japanese blind sectors. Lieutenant Zenji Abe, leading the fighter escort, spotted the Hellcats minutes before engagement. They were stacked from 20,000 to 30,000 feet, at least 60 of them, waiting like a steel curtain. We were at 18,000 feet. Every advantage belonged to them. The engagement lasted 12 minutes. Of 69 Japanese aircraft, 42 were obliterated. Commander David McCampbell, CAG of Air Group 15, shot down 7 aircraft that single day. His wingman, Lieutenant Roy Rushing, destroyed 6. "The Zeros attempted turning with us," McCampbell reported. "We simply refused engagement. We'd execute a high-side gun run, destroy one, zoom climb back to altitude, they'd attempt following, stall out, and another Hellcat would eliminate them." By day's end, the Japanese had lost 346 carrier aircraft plus 50 land-based aircraft American losses, 30 aircraft from all causes combined. American pilots in their ready rooms that evening coined the phrase "turkey shoot." The enemy aircraft had been as helpless as game birds during hunting season. The Leyte Gulf Record, October 24, 1944. Commander David McCampbell would establish his single mission record during this battle. Leading 7 Hellcats from USS Essex, he intercepted a formation of 60 Japanese aircraft heading toward the American fleet. In the ensuing 90-minute battle, McCampbell shot down 9 aircraft, 5 Zeros and 4 bombers, while his wingman Roy Rushing destroyed 6 more. "I exhausted ammunition after the 9th kill," McCampbell recorded. "The Hellcat performed flawlessly throughout. Not a single hit on my aircraft despite being outnumbered 8-1. This engagement demonstrated the complete inversion of air superiority. 7 Hellcats had routed 60 Japanese aircraft, destroying 15 without loss. McCampbell's 2 ace-in-a-day performances, 7 kills on June 19th and 9 on October 24th, earned him the Medal of Honor and Navy Cross. The aftermath of the Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf battles produced what Japanese military psychologists later termed Hellcat psychosis among surviving pilots. Admiral Ozawa, in his after-action report, wrote, "The enemy's radar-guided fighter direction achieved something we thought impossible, the industrialization of air combat. Each Hellcat was not an individual fighter, but a component in a vast machine. Our pilots, regardless of skill level, were engaging not planes, but a system. The pilot shortage became so severe that by early 1945, training was reduced to 40 to 50 hours for Navy pilots, 60 to 70 hours for Army pilots. Kamikaze pilots received only 40 to 50 hours total, approximately 7 days of training. The Okinawa Apocalypse, April to June 1945, Operation Iceberg. The Japanese launched 1,900 kamikaze sorties against the American fleet off Okinawa. The Hellcat evolved from fighter to defender against desperation suicide attacks. Lieutenant Eugene Valencia, leading his Flying Circus division of Hellcats, shot down 23 Japanese aircraft during the campaign. His tactical innovations using 4 aircraft divisions in coordinated attacks made traditional Japanese tactics suicidal. "We developed what we called the mowing machine," Valencia explained. 4 Hellcats in line abreast, separated by 100 yards, would sweep through Japanese formations at high speed. Each pilot covered his sector. We'd make 1 pass, climb back to altitude, and repeat. The mathematics of the Okinawa campaign were stark. Hellcats flew 38,038 combat sorties, claiming 2,351 victories against 249 losses, a 9.5 to 1 ratio. More significantly, they prevented approximately 80% of kamikaze aircraft from reaching their targets. The technology chasm. By 1945, the technological gap had become unbridgeable. The F6F Hellcat incorporated improvements that made it even deadlier. Water injection boosting power to 2,200 horsepower, zero-length rocket launchers, improved armor, and the K-14 computing gun sight that calculated deflection automatically. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, Japan's legendary ace with 28 official victories, though modern historians estimate closer to 15, encountered Hellcats for the first time in June 1944. Despite his skill and experience, he was nearly killed in his first engagement. "I performed my best aerobatics," he wrote in his autobiography, "loops, rolls, split S maneuvers, every technique I had perfected over 200 combats. The Hellcat followed easily, almost casually. I survived only because the American pilot made an error. He forgot to release his drop tank before combat." The human cost accounting. By war's end, the F6F Hellcat had destroyed 5,223 enemy aircraft in aerial combat, lost 270 aircraft to enemy fighters, achieved a 19.3 to 1 kill ratio, produced 305 U.S. Navy aces, accounted for 75% of all Navy air-to-air victories. The human cost for Japan was catastrophic. Of the 18,000 naval aviators who had started the war, fewer than 100 combat-experienced pilots remained by August 1945.
The transformation of Japanese naval aviation from elite force to kamikaze operations represented the ultimate admission of Hellcat superiority. Unable to compete conventionally, Japan transformed its pilots into guided missiles. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, architect of the kamikaze program, justified it with brutal mathematics. If a Zero attacks a carrier conventionally, probability of success approaches zero. The Hellcats will destroy it. If the Zero becomes a bomb, probability of hitting increases to 30%. The pilot dies either way. At least as a kamikaze, his death has meaning. On October 25, 1944, Hiroyoshi Nishizawa escorted the first official kamikaze mission led by Lieutenant Yukio Seki, claiming his 86th and 87th victories, 2 F6F Hellcats in the process. The next day, October 26, 1944, Nishizawa died as a passenger aboard a transport shot down by Hellcats from VF-14. Japan's greatest ace, helpless without a fighter, fell to the very aircraft he had briefly bested. August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito's surrender broadcast. At Atsugi Airfield, Captain Minoru Genda, who had dismissed the Hellcat as weight over finesse, listened to the Emperor's words. Around him sat the remnants of Japanese naval aviation. Teenage pilots with 40 hours of flight time, aircraft cobbled together from spare parts, empty fuel tanks. That same day, Ensign Clarence Moore of VF-31, flying from USS Belleau Wood, shot down a Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bomber after 2 p.m., the last aerial victory of World War II. The Japanese pilot, apparently unaware of the surrender, was approaching the American fleet when Moore intercepted him. 2 short bursts from the Hellcat's 6 guns ended the Pacific Air War. The Occupation Revelation, September 1945, Atsugi Airfield. The first American aircraft to land after the surrender were 12 F6F Hellcats from USS Yorktown. Japanese pilots, mechanics, and ground crew lined the runway to see their tormentor up close. American pilot Lieutenant Robert Vasu, an ace with 19 victories, demonstrated the Hellcat's capabilities to Japanese pilots. His casual aerobatics, loops, rolls, and climbs that would have torn a Zero apart left them speechless. "You have to understand," Vasu told them through an interpreter, "this isn't even pushing it. In combat with water injection, it's 20% more powerful. The plane is stressed for 13 Gs. I've never managed to break one." The engineering post-mortem, Japanese engineers studying captured Hellcats after the war discovered the true extent of American industrial superiority. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine contained 2,804 precision-machined parts, each interchangeable with any other R2800 engine. The Nakajima Sakai required hand-fitting of components. No 2 engines were exactly alike. Professor Jiro Horikoshi, designer of the Zero, studied the Hellcat extensively after the war. His conclusion was devastating. "We designed an aircraft for 1941. They designed an aircraft system for 1945. While we were perfecting the sword, they were building the industrial age." The production miracle, Grumman's production of the Hellcat itself, became a weapon. The Bethpage, New York factory operated 24 hours daily, 7 days weekly. At peak production, a new Hellcat rolled off the assembly line every 60 minutes. The company produced 12,275 Hellcats in 30 months, a feat the Japanese couldn't comprehend. In 1944, Japan produced 5,100 fighters of all types. America produced 35,000 fighters that year alone. The production system included innovations that seemed impossible to Japanese observers. Workers using color-coded instructions to assemble complex components, shifts operating around the clock, quality maintaining despite speed. The strategic revolution. The Hellcat didn't just win battles, it revolutionized naval warfare. Pre-war doctrine assumed carriers were vulnerable platforms that needed to strike first to survive. The Hellcat inverted this assumption. Carriers became fortresses that could absorb and repel any air attack. Admiral Mark Mitcher, commander of Task Force 58, understood this transformation. With the Hellcat, we don't need to find them first. Let them come. The F6F will destroy them at our convenience. This confidence allowed unprecedented offensive operations. American carriers could park off enemy coastlines for weeks, their Hellcat umbrellas making them essentially invulnerable to air attack. The cultural collision beyond technology, the Hellcat represented a cultural philosophy that invalidated Japanese military doctrine. The samurai tradition emphasized individual excellence, spiritual strength, and acceptance of death. The Hellcat embodied systematic efficiency, material superiority, and preservation of life. This philosophical gulf meant Japanese pilots couldn't adapt to Hellcat tactics, even when they understood them. The concept of refusing combat when disadvantaged, fundamental to Hellcat doctrine, was literally unthinkable to Japanese pilots trained in Bushido. The judgment of history. In 1962, the United States Navy held a symposium on Pacific War aviation. American and Japanese veterans gathered to discuss the conflict with historical perspective. Captain David McCampbell, the Navy's ace of aces with 34 victories, stated simply, "The Hellcat won the Pacific Air War, period. It destroyed Japanese aviation and made our victory inevitable." Commander Saburo Sakai responded, "The Zero was a superior fighter. The Hellcat was a superior weapon system. We never understood the difference until too late. We brought swords to a gunfight and wondered why we lost." The ultimate reckoning. The Hellcat's dominance can be reduced to simple mathematics that tell a profound story. Kill ratio, 19-1 overall. 13-1 specifically against Zeros. Hellcats produced 12,275 in 30 months. Zeros produced 1943 to 1945, approximately 6,000. American pilots trained on Hellcats, over 5,000. Japanese pilots remaining by August 1945, fewer than 100. Combat-capable Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, who had commanded the Japanese fleet at Philippine Sea, provided perhaps the most honest assessment. "We laughed at the Hellcat because we didn't understand it represented not just an aircraft, but an entire civilization's approach to war. By the time we stopped laughing, our air forces had ceased to exist." The last word. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai lived until 2000. In his final interview, he was asked about the Hellcat. His response captured the totality of its dominance. "The Zero made Japan a great naval power. The Hellcat made Japan realize it was never as great as it believed. We thought we were samurai. The Hellcat showed us we were just men with outdated weapons facing the future. Every Japanese pilot who survived the war survived because a Hellcat pilot chose to let them live. That is the ultimate defeat, existing at your enemy's discretion." The F6F Hellcat entered service weighing twice what the Zero weighed, carrying armor the Zero didn't have, powered by an engine the Japanese couldn't build, armed with weapons they couldn't match, guided by radars they couldn't detect, flown by pilots they couldn't equal in training, and produced in numbers they couldn't comprehend. Japanese pilots had laughed at it because they didn't understand that every extra pound represented not weakness but the strength of an industrial democracy that could afford to protect its warriors. By the time they understood, their laughter had turned to last letters home, their mockery to kamikaze missions, their confidence to complete collapse. The Hellcat hadn't just defeated the Zeros. It had destroyed an entire philosophy of warfare, proving that in modern combat, the nation that could build the better system would destroy the nation that could only build better warriors. The Japanese pilots had laughed at the F6F Hellcat. The Hellcat had the last laugh. It always did.